and gentlemen, we're going to talk today about more organic molecules, specifically lipids and nucleic acids. As usual, I have to talk fast because this has to fit within 10 minutes. So have your notes open and ready to go. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about are lipids. Lipids is another or fancier term for fats and oils. Fats and oils differ from the carbohydrates because they have carbon and hydrogen, just like carbohydrates do, and they have oxygen, just like carbohydrates do, but they have a little bit less oxygen than the carbs do. You're also going to see that they have a long chain structure instead of that ring structure that we got used to with the carbohydrates. Interestingly, they have twice the amount of energy per gram than carbohydrates do. So sometimes students ask me, well, why do we eat carbohydrates? Why don't we just eat fats? Why don't we eat a stick of butter? Well, if you think about it, you probably don't need that much energy. So if you eat that stick of butter, yes, it has twice the energy of the same size in a potato, for example, but that food will have to then get stored as fat in your body. So the function of lipids is the long-term energy storage in animals. So it's the carbs are quick energy, whereas the lipids are long-term energy storage. All right, there are different kinds of fats, and we're going to talk about the fatty acids today. Fatty acids are described by long carbon chains. And when I say long, I mean like 12 to 38 carbons in a row. And they have a carboxyl acid group at the end. Now, a carboxyl acid group you might not recognize, so I just want to circle it here really quickly. A carboxyl acid group is listed as COOH, which basically means a carbon double bonded to an oxygen and then single bonded to an oxygen and a hydrogen. That's where the name fatty acid comes from, is from this carboxyl acid group that's on the other end. Then it has these long chains of carbons and hydrogens. The carboxyl end is polar. Remember, water is polar. It has a slightly negative charge and a slightly positive charge. Well, so is the carboxyl end. So it is hydrophilic. Hydro means water and phil means love, like the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. So the polar end, or the carboxyl end of a fat, is attracted to water and it wants to be close to water. But the hydrocarbon chains are nonpolar. They don't have any kind of a charge within them. So they're actually repulsed by the charge on water. And so we call them hydrophobic. It's like they're afraid of water. They get pushed away by water. All right, and the other thing that I want to point out on this page is that diagram A and diagram B are both pictures of hydrocarbons or fatty acids. But diagram B is a little bit different because it's showing you the shorthand way of writing it. You can imagine how tedious it is to show all of the carbons and all of their surrounding hydrogens. By the way, notice that each carbon is bonded 4 times, like in the word honk. Carbon always has 4 bonds, and hydrogen is bonded 1 time. Actually, and the oxygens have 2 bonds. All right, so the chain below, the one on diagram B, at every vertex, there's a carbon, and then they never show the hydrogens either. So it's just a really quick way of showing a fatty acid. All right, so there's different kinds of fatty acids. The first kind we're going to talk about are the saturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids are called saturated because they have the maximum number of hydrogens possible. They have no double bonds between the carbons in that hydrocarbon chain. Now, I hope you remember that over on this side is that carboxyl acid group. That's always there, and there's always a double bond between the carbon and the oxygen. That's always supposed to be there. What we're talking about is that long chain of hydrogens and carbons. If there's no double bonds between any of those, then we call that a saturated fatty acid. At this time, and I say at this time because we are still learning a lot about fats in our diet and whether they're good for us or bad for us, but at this time, most research says saturated fatty acids are the unhealthy acids, or unhealthy fats, sorry. And they're the ones that lead to high cholesterol. They are usually solids at room temperature, and they tend to come from animal fats like butter. Now, the unsaturated fatty acids have at least 1 double bond, and you should look at the double bond in this hydrocarbon chain. That's an indicator that it is an unsaturated fatty acid. We, in general, think that the unsaturated fats are healthier for us. However, there is a class of unsaturated fats called the trans fats, and they're the absolutely worst fats ever. And it is entirely possible that in 5 years, I will have to change this entire set of notes because we will have learned something new about fats. But for the time being, unsaturated fats are the way to go. Liquids, they tend to be liquids at room temperature, and they come from plants. So for example, corn oils, olive oils, that kind of thing are the best of the fats. Substituting unsaturated fats for saturated fats seems to reduce cholesterol levels. High cholesterol is correlated with unhealthy hearts, strokes, that kind of thing. All right, a triglyceride. The prefix tri means three. Triglycerides are when we have three molecules of fatty acids. So you can see those three chains linked together, and they're attached to one molecule of glycerol. You're going to learn to identify glycerol later, but they're all attached to that glycerol, which is on the left where the penguin is. The reason we show the penguin is that penguins use this fat to keep them warm underwater, and he's covering up part of the glycerol molecule. You see Homer because if you eat more calories than you burn, like Homer Simpson, the extra energy may be stored as triglycerides in your fat cells. Low triglyceride levels are correlated with healthy hearts. Remember, correlated doesn't mean for sure they cause healthy hearts, just that people with low triglyceride levels tend to have healthier hearts. So the recommendation is always to avoid obesity, in essence, that keeps our hearts healthier. All right, we're going to talk about one other kind of lipid. These are called the phospholipids. Phospholipids are found in cell membranes. They're the main component of cell membranes. And unlike triglycerides, which had three fatty acids attached to a glycerol molecule, this has two fatty acids attached to glycerol. So if you look at that diagram in the bottom left-hand corner, it looks like a stick figure like somebody would draw when they were 3 years old, a little head with two legs sticking out. Okay, that's the shorthand way of drawing a phospholipid. The head itself is the glycerol, and it is hydrophilic. It has a charge to it, and so it is attracted to water. But the two tails coming down, those are hydrocarbon chains. Those are the fats, and they are hydrophobic. They are nonpolar. They are repulsed by water, and they push away from water. So when you drop a whole bunch of phospholipids into water, the heads pop out and face the water, and the tails flip in away from the water. So if you look at the second diagram that's in black, it says many phospholipids forming a lipid bilayer. Those heads are touching the water, the yellow part are touching the water, and the tails are safely repelled on the inside. If you look at the third diagram on the far right that's orange colored, that shows you how a cell membrane is made. It's full of these heads facing the water on the outside and the water on the inside of the cell, but the tails are safely away from the water, tucked inside. And then just the diagram up at the top is a molecular model of what one phospholipid looks like. So that's the longhand way of drawing it. Always use the shorthand stick figure way of drawing them. All right, now I want you to pause here, answer the questions. I'm going to go through the questions really quickly because I don't have much time. Okay, how would you describe the structure of a fat? Long hydrocarbon chains attached to carboxyl acid groups. If you just say long hydrocarbon chains, you're good. No rings. How does a saturated fat differ from an unsaturated fat structurally? Saturated fats have no double bonds in their hydrocarbon chains. No double bonds in their hydrocarbon chains. What is the main function of lipids? They're for energy storage. Carbs were quick energy. Lipids are energy storage. And then finally, where are the phospholipids found? They are the main component of cell membranes. Check your work, make sure your answers are correct. I've only got a minute left, you guys. I'm just going to go over nucleic acids quickly. We've talked about DNA before, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. They are a type of organic molecule. We need to just refresh our memory on them. Nucleic acids are made of nucleotides. Nucleotides include nitrogen bases, A, T, C, G, or U, plus a phosphate and a sugar, and I'll review that on the next page. Their function, you need to learn to recognize them, and I think most of you recognize them, but their function is to store genetic information. Lipids stored energy. These guys store genetic information. And so just a real quick reminder on what a nucleotide is. A nucleotide is what DNA is built out of. So it's a nitrogen base, A, T, C, or G, a sugar, deoxyribose or ribose, and a phosphate all put together. If you see, when we're identifying molecules like on a packet or something, if you see a phosphorus atom, the molecule is probably a nucleotide. You're probably looking at part of a DNA molecule or a building block of DNA. All right, you guys, that's it. I know that was super fast. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks. Having trouble shutting this off.